Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the end of week 3 of Surviving the Coronavirus at Home. I'm your Facebook host, Craig Nippenberg. Really want to thank all of you that have been tuning in. We've had, in our first 2 weeks, we had 2,400 people watching the show. And I know Angie's podcast on Tuesday was very popular. She talked about the homeschooling place, acceptance through living in the moment. Before we get to that, I do want to thank Michelle Denoy, who was on last week on Thursday talking about stress and managing your stress. And I was jotting down notes as she was talking, and I thought I'd share one of my strategies when our daughter first joined our house in first grade and had some mood regulation issues when she was young. And Michelle talked about, I wrote, be a mirror on it so that it would remind me. I would see it every day next to my computer that if things got escalated, rather than me getting escalated and doing my kind of Germanic sergeant yelling back, which only made it worse, that I would stay calm and just be a mirror back to her to help her regulate her own emotions. So really appreciated Michelle's tips. And also, thanks to Angie, I loved her phrase. Instead of homeschooling, she called it crisis schooling, which I thought was extremely pertinent. And I think the first thing she said that you all have to remember is she said, when you're homeschooling, you're not home very much. You're out doing things. You're connecting with other homeschoolers. You're going on adventures and field trips. And I think that really hit it for all of us, is that we're not able to do that part of it. I also want to, before we get to the topic, share some adventures that have been coming in and that I've been collecting the last week and a half since I last spoke to you. I want to start with one that the young man told me about, and this really is, it's not about Corona, but it's about his aunt who was dying of pancreatic cancer years ago when he was a young boy. And we were talking about him right now as a young man and his girlfriend trying to find some adventures in the Corona time. And he said, oh, it's like when I went to see her for the last time. And they traveled out east, and she was in her house. And he said, I walked into the house and I heard her yell from her bedroom. And she said, don't come in here. And he said, I paused. And then she said, don't come in here unless you're willing to dance. If you want to dance with me, you can come in. And she spent her final days dancing. And that really captures that whole spirit. I also talked to a couple of boys last night, elementary boys, who they showed me on a Zoom conference their big tree out front, and they had suspended climbing ropes, and they had climbing harnesses, and they were learning how to shimmy up the tree and then doing some fabulous rope swinging. I got to watch them swing on their ropes while trying to have a session. Also got to participate in a birthday car parade for one of my friends who turned, he's fifth grader, so he turned 11. And they stood out front, he stood out front, and cars drove by, and everybody waved at him and honked at him and tossed him gifts. And that was quite a bit of fun, just to see him so excited and so happy. Another teenager that I see is making the use of the time, and that's an important one for your teens, is what are some things they could take on right now? What could they do? And he's using the time to finish designing his Eagle Scout project that's going to be coming up, and he's going to be planning it out and getting all the architectural kind of stuff completed. I also want to share a few emails I received from adventures. This is from a mom who said, I just had a mindful moment of gratitude, which is what we're talking about today, as I sat by my daughter's bath and blew bubbles. Her creative world drew me in. Who knew that we had bubbles in the cabinet for this particular day? And I just thought that was amazing. All those years, those bubbles have probably been in there for years, but that was the day that made it a meaningful day for her, being mindful and appreciative. I received this one last week from a mom who said, because we were not able to attend church yesterday, we had the idea of the children acting out the gospel. It was the raising of Lazarus, so very conducive to acting out. My girls, 6 and 11, love the dress-up part and putting on lots of makeup to be Martha and Mary. My son, 9, was probably only willing to participate because he was wrapped up like a mummy to play Lazarus. Everyone enjoyed the act, which led to some spiritually insightful discussions and lots of amusement, especially as our dog couldn't stop hounding Lazarus as he lay in the tomb. What a beautiful story of some family fun. At our house, my daughter finished painting her furniture in her room. Last weekend, she learned to dye her mother's hair, which was a 2-hour process out on the back deck. Fortunately, the weather was beautiful and warm. And now she's making masks for us. She's taking all our old bandanas, stitching them in a mask, and she's making one for Grandma right now to send to her. So keep sending your adventures in. I'd love to hear them. I really love collecting those stories of adventures and finding meaning. Now, as for our topic today, it dawned on me last Tuesday when I was talking to you last Tuesday afterwards. I thought, we're really entering a new phase of this. That phase one was when I published the piece, got picked up around the country on 12 tips for how to handle the coronavirus and this pandemic. And it was all this stuff to try to just deal with what was happening in the moment with so many changes. And after last Tuesday, I just thought about it. This is sort of phase two. And I reflected on Dr. Seuss's book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. And he has that wonderful section on the waiting place where everyone is just waiting for their pair of shoes or their hair to grow, all sorts of different playful things they're waiting for. Now, there are plenty of traditions and rituals and historical stories about waiting. Um, for our friends who just celebrated Passover and will have to wait another year to have their family back together again for Passover, we know the Israelites wandered the desert for years before they could enter the promised land. For our Christian families who will be celebrating small Easter gatherings, sadly for us, we'll have to wait another year to see our grandchildren gather Easter eggs. But Jesus wandered in the desert for 40 days. For those of you who like American history and the history of Americas, it was Magellan who got stuck in what was famously called the horse latitudes as he tried to sail across the Atlantic. And it's an area along the equator where the wind really doesn't blow. And they just kind of were pooling there for great weeks on end. And tragically resulted as their ship was going down, throwing off 250 of their horses into the ocean to save the ship. So there are plenty of examples in our lives where we have to wait. If you think about it when you were a child, Christmas was one of those times, if you celebrate Christmas, that you're just waiting for Christmas to come. It just seems like an eternity. Or waiting for Halloween, that's another one where the kids start planning in September and they just can't bear the wait. Now, as you age, your perception of time changes. And I think my wife and I both concluded that we should do Christmas like every 2 or 3 years because it seems like it just comes up again and it's there before you know it. But in a child's mind, it feels like forever they're waiting. So I want to read a piece that I wrote, and it got picked up, some pieces of it by a newspaper up in British Columbia, and did an interview with the Huffington Post the other day, which I'll share a piece from that. But just on this idea of acceptance. So I'll read it to you, and again, if you have questions you want to type in, Sydney is handling those and can get those to me. I want to thank her again for her hard work. So I'll start with the article. Now that the weeks of the initial shock and daily living adjustments, schools closed, businesses closed, shelter-in-place orders are behind us, we're now living in phase 2 of the pandemic, or as Dr. Seuss calls it, the waiting place. Every day, parents are trying to figure out how to help educate their children online, how to work from home, how to pay bills in the months ahead, worrying about those who have the virus, or loved ones who are at risk if they are infected, wondering if our community has reached the peak of infection, and how to survive the stress of everyone being stuck at home 24/7. The current running beneath all of those stresses, and the one most likely to wash away your mental health, is that nagging question: when will this be over so that we can go back to our normal lives? Even those convicted of crimes can count on the approximate days until their release from prison. Soldiers at war can count the days until their deployment is over. Not being able to check off the days off the calendar, a great strategy for young children who have a parent on a business trip, makes this more psychologically and emotionally difficult. The solution to this place of waiting is to accept the tension between two states of being. The first state is to try and simply live in the moment, something which Michelle talked about. That means focusing on what you're doing and finding gratitude in everything you're doing. The smell of your morning coffee, the sunshine and breath of fresh air if you can get outside, the pure joy of watching your younger children laugh and play, the compassion you feel as you write cards for an elderly neighbor or help them with taking out the trash, the friendliness of a wave to your postal worker, and the fun of a board game with your children, the deep appreciation of snuggling on the sofa with your kids while you watch your nightly show, and the quiet in the house when your kids are finally asleep. Like the single-mindedness that comes with yoga, breath work, meditation, prayer, or being in the zone with fitness activities, if you focus in on the moments of gratitude, you will relax and your stress levels will fall as the dopamine levels in your brain's pleasure area and prefrontal cortex rise. And that's a state of hyper-focus that I talk about in my lectures. It's not too high of a state. When your dopamine levels get too high, that puts you in a really hyper-focus zone. This is just that nice, pleasurable single-mindedness when your dopamine levels rise just enough to keep you focused right on what you're doing. Even when faced with the unpleasing tasks of grocery shopping or managing online school, give yourself and children a boost by thanking the grocery clerk and thanking your child's teacher for their service. And I really think right now it's teachers that are also our heroes, along with our health workers and our grocery workers and postal workers. Teachers are giving the children a sense of normalcy and really need to be thanked. And real off the topic quick, but on that smell of the morning coffee, one of my favorite adventures as my son is we do a yearly ice camping trip, and we go up in the mountains high here in Colorado, and we'll dig all sorts of shelters or snow caves. And he, being a young adult, he likes to sleep in the morning, and I'm up pretty early. And my favorite activity is to take my coffee cup and scoop snow off the edge of the cave. And then I turn on our little propane tank called a jet boil, and I melt that snow in that cup. And then I carefully pour in my Via coffee packets and mix it up. And it has to be so precise. You have to be so focused because if you light your gloves on fire, you're in trouble. If you've got boiling water and it spills on your gloves, you're going to get burnt and then you're going to get frostbite. So it's all so precise. And for that moment, nothing else in the world exists for me. And then I get to just sit and look out of the cave at the mountains and drink my coffee with my son sleeping next to me. It is truly a magical moment for me every time we do it. Now, the second state of being that we must balance with these moments of grateful living in the moment is the necessary task of projecting into the future. Human survival is always dependent on the ability to think and plan for what lies ahead. Like a squirrel gathering nuts for winter, we do need to listen to some news to find out where the pandemic is headed and what we need to do now in order to be prepared. And some of the news coming out this morning looked pretty positive. These can be simple things like calculating when you will need to head for the store for toilet paper, baby formula, or more milk, or longer-term worries about how this will impact your child emotionally or academically. There's quite a bit of talk right now in the mental health field about how this is going to impact all Americans and all people around the world, everyone in this world. longer term from a mental health standpoint. They will also involve more time-consuming things like filing for unemployment, slimming down their budget, or filing for small business government loan programs. You also need to embrace your fears and sense of loss over family or friends who are sick, and the intense thought of an elderly relative passing away and you're not being able to be there with them. We had a shock this past weekend. I think it was Friday. And my 93-year-old mother called us to inform us that in her retirement community, the woman next to her in the apartment next to hers had tested positive. So my mom is now on a 14-day quarantine and has to check her temperature twice a day, and everything is brought up to her room in the hall, and she goes out and gets it, but she's on total quarantine. And the thought of her, something happening to her through the coronavirus or any other thing that could happen at her age and not being able to be there is really quite difficult. The trick is to block these times out and limit the time you spend on them. Having a simple place in the house to discuss or deal with these things, followed by putting the paperwork or bills out of sight, that help you compartmentalize that anxious future state of being. Afterwards, plan something relaxing for yourself or your family, and get right back to focusing on your gratitude. Finally, this extended time can be great for imagining your future self. Are there some things you or your children want to accomplish with this extra time on your hands? Maybe it's those boxes of photos or old papers you wanted to go through. Maybe it's a book you've wanted to read, or working on a new fitness or healthier eating regime. What's something your children might want to learn about, or a hobby they've wanted to get into? For my teen daughter, she decided on repainting her bedroom walls and furniture as she looks forward to starting high school this fall. Approach these new projects with a sense of fun and adventure. When this pandemic is resolved, it's these projects and aforementioned moments of gratitude that will help you accept the waiting that will live in your diaries and the memories of your children. And I have to believe the mom who sent in her adventure of observing her daughter's delight with bubbles, that she will have that memory for years to come, absolute years to come. Finally, just a little piece on that important question of when your child asks, when will this be over? And this is the one I was just interviewed about. And basically, I don't want to read all because it's some that's a repeat. But basically, you first want to, and when your child asks you that, you want to first validate how difficult this is. That give them a hug and let them know that this is a hard thing for them and a hard thing for you, and just validate that that's a great question. But then you have to be honest and simply say, we don't know for sure. Next, talk to them about how the family is trying hard to plan for the unknown future as best as it can. Start with brainstorming ideas your child might want to do at home now as well as in the future when you are freed from shelter in place. Start a list or have your child draw a picture of themselves doing the things they dream of. Dreaming helps us, it gives us hope. You can also discuss changes the families could make if your child has some particular irritations. The sibling who keeps coming into their bedroom, the family member who's hogging up the TV or the electronics, or perhaps the children wanting you to turn the news off. Fixing these problems might bring some welcome relief. I saw a boy yesterday on teletherapy, and he was quite upset because they have a room that's the play area, and his brother's area is on one end, and his Legos is on the other end, and he loves his Legos. But his brother keeps coming over and touching his Legos. And I talked to his parents and him about creating a sacred space for him. And I used a trick from the fraternity house when you had four guys crammed into the room. And the only way to have a sacred space was to hang blankets to kind of create your own little tent for your space around your bed or your desk. And I suggested they string a rope across the upper line of the ceiling and hang just clothespin some blankets on there so that this young man could feel like he has his own sacred space. So you sometimes have to think about right now at this point, what are the things that are bothering your kids? And what can you creatively, how can you creatively problem solve? On his case, I had been given a tip by his mother that he wasn't doing his chores that he was supposed to. And I said, I tell you what, I'll get you the blankets if you promise to do your chores. And so he promised he would start doing his chores during the family chore time. Fixing these problems might bring some welcome relief. Finally, tell them that you will update them when you hear positive news about the virus slowing down or projections on when your state might lift some of the restrictions. So again, it's this balance between what Michelle talked about with living in the moment and really appreciating that with gratitude and etching those things in your memory. My mother constantly used to say to us, etch this in your memory. You want to have a lot of etchings from this. At the same time, you do need to think about the future. You do need to face your worries and your losses and things that are irritating the family, and address those things as best you can and provide some hope by thinking about the future and activities that all of you are going to want to be doing. But it's really having a balance of those two. And when it comes to the stresses, you want to compartmentalize those and box those up, get them out of your mind so you can focus on the gratitude. And it's this constant tension between those two. And it's like a teeter-totter where you're balancing those two states of existence. The other thing I thought I'd mention, I was thinking about wearing it today, but I decided not to. It wasn't very professional looking. But I have a favorite T-shirt, and the T-shirt has one word on it, and it just says suffer. And it comes from Lance Armstrong, who has a podcast and about the philosophy of suffering. And he's very open about how he caused his own suffering by his problems when he was biking. And sometimes you cause your own problems, but other times life throws things at you, like the coronavirus has been thrown at all of us and causing suffering. And the trick is that you have to embrace suffering as a part of the human condition. And it's really part of the fact that we have empathy. So in my book, the last section, I have all sorts of tips on things of how to talk to your children about things. And one of them is called The Price of Empathy is Loss. And because we have empathy and we feel attachment to our friends, our family, our traditions, our schools, our teachers, all these things we love, we love them and have empathy for them. And when we lose them or afraid of losing them, we feel that anxiety and that pain and that suffering. And a good thing to say to your kids when they're sad or feeling down or worried about what they might lose is to say, honey, you're sad or you're anxious because you are attached and you have empathy. And remind them that having empathy and feeling loss is still a much better life than not having any empathy at all. And that's what our brains are wired for. And that's the ultimate meaning of it all. And with that, as we wrap up here, I'm going to share a couple poems, and then I have some resources for you. On the empathy part, I was given a poem 20 plus years ago after a trauma at a church that my office was in. But it's real short and sweet. And it says, life is short and pain is long. And we were put here for one thing, to help each other. That's something that keeps me going every day, that we're here to help each other. Now, this next poem is just a wonderful comment on this kind of state we're in of we're together, but we're apart, and how this is impacting us. It's a viral sensation. Speaking of, it's a good virus. This is a positive virus. It's written by a woman, a retired healthcare worker in Wisconsin, who for years has dabbled in writing poetry, which she shares with her friends on Facebook, and never getting a lot of coverage for him. But she wrote this one. She was feeling down, but also hopeful because she had read about how the carbon output of carbon from carbon burning fossils from gasoline and cars and planes had dropped dramatically. And I read recently in the US, it dropped about 30%. So she was feeling hopeful. And she wrote this poem and put it on Facebook, and it got picked up, and it's all over the world now. Her name is Kitty O'Mara, and she credited her husband, who's a retired school teacher. And she was talking to him about feeling down, and he said, go write something. So here's what she wrote. It's called And the People Stayed Home, a poem about hope in coronavirus time. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently. And the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger had passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. Just an absolutely beautiful poem. So during this time of waiting, I hope that you will continue to find adventures. If you remember the Dr. Seuss book, the little boy escapes the waiting place and he's off to great adventures. So I hope all of you find ways to escape this with some adventures and being mindful of each and every moment. Finally, a couple of resources. If you happen to get the Wall Street Journal, or you can Google it, today they had a section on 100 non-screen ideas to occupy your kids' quarantine. I got to tell you, we know that the rules on gaming and electronics has been surpassed. I have had a couple of kids recently share with me how they're even tired of gaming now. They're like so tired of doing it. But it has 100 different ideas inside and outside for occupying your kids during this time of waiting. Also, I want to share that my friends Liz and Corey Hopkins, who run Hopkins Education Services, it's CGH at hopkinseducationservices.com. They help families with both mindfulness for kids and also with academic support and coaching. They have the Liz and Corey Morning Show on Facebook Live daily at 9 to practice gratefulness and structure in the home. They have education coaches conducting a mindfulness book club where students grades 2 to 5 read a social story and write their own pages on how to get through difficult situations. They're also adapting for helping with online tutoring, using tools to support students on IEPs and help them reach their goals. Their phone number is 720-252-6189. And the second one I wanted to mention, I had a Zoom conference. I usually do coffee at Panera by my house with everyone I meet with. We did a little Zoom session with the director of Linda Mood Bell, Jessica Ackles, I think that's how you say her last name. She's the director at Linda Mood Bell. They are doing their services online as well. If your child is struggling with reading, needs one-on-one support, they're doing that now as well through the summer, and to help kids get ready to return back to school, hopefully in the fall. You can find them at denver.center. So it's denver.center at lindamoodbell.com. And Linda Mood Bell is all one word, no spaces. Their number is 720-528-8404, 720-528-8404. And Linda Mood Bell is really the gold standard for children with dyslexia. And if they had been around when I was a kid, I would have been attending their enrichment program, and I could have really used the support. So thank you again for tuning in today. We'll have our next program on Tuesday. We're still planning on it'll be a guest next Tuesday. We got 2 or 3 options we're looking at. Perhaps we'll do more on the crisis schooling, some tips for that. We're also looking at a program on having a couple on to talk about working at home together and surviving this. But I want to wish you all blessings and the best, and keep collecting your adventures. And let me just check to see if we had any questions come in. Nope. And just a comment from a buddy, said he was thinking about me. Anyway, God bless to all of you, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Thank you.